A red car pulls into a compound and both Mark and Rebecca get out. They move towards a tree and wrap their arms around the trunk, connecting with their fingers on both sides. Mark leads Rebecca into the house after they take out their suitcases from the car. The furniture is covered in sheets, depicting a long time of abandonment. Rebecca asks how long it's been since Amaya's parents passed away, and Mark replies it's been 2 years. They head upstairs, landing in Amaya's bedroom. Mark pulls off sheets from the furniture in the room, and Rebecca opens up the window. She turns towards a corner and can visualize a young Amaya in a lover's embrace. This excites her because it means that the house is alive, and all the motivation she needs to get started. The pair pick a room and set up with a laptop. Mark reminds Rebecca that their interview can't lean into politics, and Rebecca promises that won't be the case. He opens up about the summer of 1991. This is when Nuria learns her parents were tragically taken away from her, leaving her alone in the big farmhouse. Friends and family try to help her heal, but Nuria sorts comfort instead in the arms of a lover, Dmitry. She believed he was Russian, but Mark knew Dmitry was actually Georgian. Olmo, her parents' bodyguard, who had witnessed her parents' demise, shows up. He tells her to pack her things and come with him, because he knows the Georgian mafia was responsible for her parents' tragedy. He starts driving her away and warns her not to return to the Costa Brava for at least 10 years. Her house is now Georgian mafia territory, and she can't call the police because the mafia are more powerful. Olmo takes a diversion off the main path, and when Nuria asks, he relays that he'd like to go for a swim. She watches him take off his clothes and then get into the water. She goes after him, also unclad, and they act on their sensual desires. Exhilarated, she takes a dive afterward, but when she emerges back to the surface, Olmo is gone. He's left behind her parents' car and she can't drive. It's Rebecca's turn to divulge. She starts that her mother's name was Lamaka, a music prodigy in her prime. Lamaka is displayed as a rock star, performing a rather explicit song for a hungry crowd. She's pregnant at the time, and the crowd is welcome to rub at her bump. Rebecca recalls she was conceived from a one-night stand with a faceless stranger while her mother was intoxicated. There was nothing rosy about her birth either, as she'd had to be operated on twice, on the brink of demise when she'd only just been born. The favorite part of Rebecca's story is when her mother meets a fan while on a stroll with baby Rebecca in a stroller. Victor cruised his way into their lives, and Rebecca remarks he was a godsend, a man her mother needed, and he easily treated Rebecca and Maka as family. Her grandparents are Pio and Candela, and they lived in Seville at the time. They were receptive to Victor. One day, Pio and Victor go horseback riding. They encounter a bull and Victor bravely approaches, but the bull doesn't step out of the way. Pio beckons on him to retreat with him. They return to the house, where Victor notices that some of the decorations include taxidermy pieces. Outside, baby Rebecca is crying incessantly, and Maka is in a daze. She hands over the child to her mother, and Candela can tell something is suddenly off about her daughter. It only gets worse. Victor finds Rebecca abandoned in her crib. While she's wailing, Maka is curled up on the bathroom floor, wishing the noise to go away. Maka makes the decision to seek treatment, and her family is supportive, seeing her to the institution that will help her mental health. Rebecca is left in Victor's care, automatically making him a single dad. Rebecca's father compensates Victor by putting him on an allowance, giving him a job at his company, and giving him a house. See? Loverboy does pay off. It's Mark's cue to talk about the Russian children. To do so, he brings up Bilbao's crucial times. 1,500 children were sent to Russia, separated from their parents forever, so they could escape the collapsing community. Part of the children sent away were Jacinto and Julieta. Julieta had magic hands when it came to the piano, and Jacinto fell in love with her. They were recruited by the KGB and would later have 2 sons, Victor and Olmo, who would also undergo military training. Rebecca remembers Victor saying he enjoyed his time in the military, as it was a very happy time for the Mendozas. Victor and Olmo eventually migrated to Lorette, Amaya's hometown. As for Jacinto and Julieta, they moved to the coast, near Alicante. They bought a home in Julieta's hometown. A scene of the family singing together plays through. Julieta plays the piano while the men sing in baritone voices. Mark and Rebecca put their heads together trying to decipher more. Rebecca knows Olmo stopped being a bodyguard and driver. She adds that he started working as a gigolo and was worth every pay with his irresistible appeal. Mark reveals that Olmo actually had a high testosterone level proven by a blood test. Rebecca is in the mood to flirt, and Mark takes her up on her body language, moving closer to capture her lips. Rebecca asks they return back to business, like she hadn't been the one to incite pleasure. Mark picks up a book on the table written by Amaya. He'd walked in on his mother reading the unpublished pages and noted it was written by Amaya. He knew his mother liked the work from the way she read it. Amaya wrote the manuscript and turned in the first novel, at the same desk Rebecca is occupying. The work of art would go on to be recognized and appreciated by many. Rebecca opines the book was overrated. Mark recalls that his mother fell in love with a woman at some point, and Rebecca remarks his mother definitely liked to express herself in the water. Mark teases that it's hereditary, but Rebecca already knows. Back to the story. Maka refuses to leave the hospital and be reunited with her family, mostly because she's still unwell. Mark believes Maka's biggest issue was guilt for abandoning Rebecca in the first place. Victor chooses to persevere and comes up with an idea to help Maka confront her fears. Victor puts Rebecca through calling her mother and accustoming her to Rebecca's voice. Maka is receptive, and they form a new ritual of Maka singing lullabies for Rebecca over the phone. Victor also enjoys hearing Maka sing. Looking back now, Rebecca can only marvel at how incredible Victor truly is. The compound is still alive with memories, and both Mark and Rebecca can see it as they look out the window and see the sturdy tree from earlier. Amaya and Olmo hit off as soon as their paths cross. Olmo was looking for a fresh start, and Amaya had just returned from Madrid after receiving an award. Rebecca adds in the documentary that Amaya broke a new record for a number of times she reached climax. She opines it makes for a more scandalous read, but Mark scoffs that it's rather ridiculous. Olmo drives Amaya back to the property. She asks him where he was headed, but he doesn't have a clue. The farmhouse is littered with cows. Olmo wraps his arms around the tree and listens as if hoping for a heartbeat. Amaya's parents watch their daughter and the stranger from their place inside the house. Olmo is done assessing the place and deems it fit to settle in. Amaya promises she'll make his wish come true, and they share a kiss. Amaya's mother is appalled, but both Mark and Rebecca are more liberal, wanting the couple to enjoy their moment, even though it's just a memory. Victor and young Rebecca go to visit Maka at the institution. She's out in the garden, believing she's a tree in a plant pot. Victor and Rebecca take a seat on the nearby bench, and then Victor begins to relay what Maka will do for them today. This includes stopping pretending to be a plant, looking presentable, and facing her daughter. While Maka goes off to put on the dress Victor brought for her, Rebecca expresses that Victor is really a blessing, so much so that she'll address him as her father. Victor is pleased and calls Rebecca his daughter. Maka returns and tells Rebecca that Victor has been pushing for her to come home. Rebecca likes the prospects and Maka considers it for a second more. She still has voices hunting her, and she hopes it won't interfere. Maka does return home and has a bonding time with her daughter in the garden. Rebecca wants to know what the voices she hears are like. So Maka clarifies, it's just one voice with various imitations. The voice belongs to a boy who torments her about motherhood. Rebecca reasons Maka should tell the voice off as she doesn't owe it anything, but Maka explains it's more complicated than that. Rebecca is curious about what the voice is saying now. Maka replies that the voice is teasing her as they speak. Older Rebecca relays that Victor and Olmo both got married. Both brothers lived similar lives, even with their new families. The marriages were 6 years apart, meaning Rebecca was 8 at her parents' union and 14 at her step-uncle's marriage to Amaya. Rebecca and Mark meet for the first time at Olmo's wedding. At the time, Mark's mother didn't know what Amaya's groom looked like. Rebecca and Mark are both the same age, and it's only inevitable that their paths should cross. At some point, Julietta's mental health started to decline. The Mendozas only attended Olmo's wedding. Rebecca breaches the no politics rule, but Mark gently puts her in check. Two different scenes of both brothers at their own matrimonial ceremony play out interchangeably. Both are surrounded by friends and family that are happy about their milestones. During Amaya's day, her mother expresses her wish that her siblings could have been present, but there's a clear animosity, and Amaya is glad that it's otherwise. To clear tension, her father chants for a kiss, and the crowd picks it up. Amaya and Olmo get to their feet and oblige. Something similar happened with Victor and Maka. It was, however, during Amaya and Olmo's day, during their kiss, that Mark looked at Rebecca and knew he wanted to kiss Rebecca the same. Older Rebecca teases that she hadn't noticed younger Mark at the time. At some point, during Amaya and Olmo's reception, Victor goes towards the restroom, and Rebecca notices. When she was much younger, she'd gone into the restroom after he was done and seen his business flyer rolled up like a pipe, traces of powder around it. When her mother and Victor had gotten married, the Reverend, Maka's uncle, had dined with them, but had to distance himself after learning that Victor wasn't baptized. Maka's father explained that if the Reverend wasn't his brother, then the marriage would be annulled. Maka's parents also reveal that their granddaughter is baptized. They had to in case the second operation was unsuccessful. Victor and Maka stood up to have a couple dance, but Maka decided midway to turn it into a father-daughter dance instead. At Amaya and Olmo's reception, Victor and Rebecca dance just the same. They spot Maka and Julieta having a connection, and Rebecca realizes that she's never been introduced to her adoptive grandparents. She goes over to say hello, but Jacinto is dismissive at first. Maka and Julieta continue to bond. Maka even introduces Rebecca to Julieta. Jacinto eventually pulls Rebecca to his side, glad that Victor took such a moving responsibility upon himself. Back to Olmo and Amaya's reception. Amaya introduces Nuria Belmont, her editor, and Olmo realizes he knows exactly who Nuria is. He lets them dance while he goes on to catalyze Rebecca and Mark's attraction by putting them to dance as well. Two storms interrupt both weddings. Maka had a premonition. It's more eventful at Olmo's wedding because one of the cows goes missing. Rebecca and Mark are under the tree making out, oblivious of the pending danger. Thankfully, Olmo steps in and pulls them away before the cow falls through the leaves and branches. All Olmo can decipher is that a powerful force put it there in the first place. Mark wrote Rebecca a letter. She has it with her now, even though he's still embarrassed he'd written it at all. She acclaims the letter was very expressive and romantic, and had shown her parents the piece. Maka voiced Mark truly expressed himself well, and Victor wanted to know Rebecca's response. She showed them her letter and it caused Victor to chuckle. They all decided young Rebecca should play hard to get. On the other hand, Nuria didn't want her son to come off as desperate. Looking back now, Mark knows he didn't give a hoot about appearing desperate. Rebecca excuses that she is more focused on her mother. Maka was getting better, singing and bonding with her teenage daughter. Rebecca convinced Victor to go easier with the medication, and this in return made Maka less difficult. Both Rebecca and Mark resided in their own separate worlds for 9 months. Mark remembers because it correlates with the release of Amaya's second book, and 9 months is a human's gestation period. Amaya and Olmo agreed to have a child. She'd been writing while he was out in the fields. He looked in her direction and she gestured for his presence. It led to an intimate moment, but 9 months later, they'd be a novel rather than a baby to show. Mark and Rebecca relive the scene until Rebecca calls for a break. They should have lunch. Like the rest of the house, the dining room has its own story. Photos of Amaya's siblings were once plastered on the kitchen wall. Amaya always sits with her back to them, and Rebecca understands why. Amaya's siblings hurt people, 9 in total. One ended up in prison, while the other was a fugitive. Amaya's first novel was inspired by the evil her siblings caused. She'd basically resurrected victims as characters in her book. Rebecca's take is that the novel was spooky. Mark counters that it was fascinating and made waves. Rebecca teases back that they're breaching the no politics rule. Mark and Rebecca can see the family at the dining table. Amaya's father liked the novel while her mother couldn't stomach it. Amaya wants her parents to communicate with Olmo in Spanish, but Basque is fine for Olmo. He's got ties to the latter language even though when it comes to heritage, he can't pride himself anywhere. Amaya and Olmo have an argument. Olmo doesn't appreciate the concept of his wife's novel, but Amaya doesn't understand the big deal. She feels Olmo is getting triggered, and it has to do with something from his past. Olmo doesn't want to talk about his past though, never has. Amaya insists that they address it as she knows nothing about him before he came to Russia. There are 14 years Amaya can't account for, but Olmo isn't forthcoming. He walks away, even as she shouts out that she's his wife and a writer. Amaya grows cold towards Olmo's mysterious demeanor, yet sex still remains on the table when they need it. It's bonded them and keeps them bonded until a fateful day. The family is in the living room watching sports. Amaya steps into her office, seeking solitude, but Olmo walks in seconds later. She has a new manuscript that he approves of. It's in the erotica genre, none of the paranormal crap that irks him. She'll be in Barcelona for a day to meet with Nuria and get the necessary things in place to launch the manuscript. He mentions it will be their first time apart. She hopes he'll be waiting for her return so they can discuss their relationship. She believes there's nothing substantial about said relationship. It always revolves around physical attraction and needs. It's nighttime and Mark calls Rebecca to come see a full moon. Their gaze finds the tree, and Mark remarks that he loves connecting his branches to Rebecca. She affirms they'll learn the whole truth that connects them. For that to happen, they'll need to keep exchanging stories. By morning, Olmo takes Amaya to the airport. She's walking towards the airport's entrance. At the same time, another woman, Veronica, strides to take her place in the passenger seat she's vacated. Veronica is immediately handsy, wanting to know who Amaya is. Olmo doesn't divulge, stating he will in due time. The meeting with Nuria didn't go as planned. Nuria asserts the novel is a step down from Amaya's actual potential. She encourages Amaya to try again. Veronica needs Olmo to carry out some mafia-style duties and teach a guy that's gotten too cocky a lesson or two. She also alludes to pleasure after business, and Olmo smiles invitingly. Nuria opens up to Amaya about the time Olmo showed up at her house in Lorette after she'd lost her parents. Olmo showed up and offered to help her out with her Georgian mafia lover. The idea was to invite the guy over that afternoon so Nuria could talk out an interesting offer with him. When Dimitri came, Olmo jumped him, and things took a quick and violent turn. Olmo told him his boss was on the way, and Dimitri's father had no business being in that territory. Dimitri let Olmo know that the same applied to him. Next thing Nuria knew, Olmo pulled a knife, and wham, right in the heart, like a professional. Mark and Rebecca picked the night in particular because it's a full moon for everyone in the story. On a similar night, Jacinto and Julieta sat on their porch. Jacinto tells Julieta the moon is just for her. Teenage Rebecca wakes up and finds her mother in the garden, grunting and disheveled. She goes out to get her mother to confront her fears. Maka says that having Rebecca ended her career. She battles with the voice in her head, failing, taking up a blade. Rebecca stands her ground and Victor eventually rushes out to intervene. He's late these days, even as a salesperson. He hugs his girls, but he reeks of perfume. Meanwhile, Jacinto leads Julieta to play the piano. He tells her he lives for her forgiveness, and in return, she hides her face as if in defeat. Amaya follows Nuria back to her apartment after their dinner, after both the decision about the erotica manuscript and Olmo's assassin's-side. Mark instantly thinks of Rebecca when he sees Amaya. Amaya hasn't heard from Olmo all day. He's too busy with Veronica. Nuria offers both comfort and desire to the abandoned wife. In the present, Mark has had enough documentation for the night, so he swoops Rebecca in his arms, and they explore themselves indoors. By morning light, Rebecca and Mark stir awake. They're content bearing their stories, and by evening, there'll be a cause for celebration. While Mark goes to have a shower, the house comes alive with memories yet again. Rebecca can see Olmo drive into the compound. He walks into his matrimonial room and stares longing at the wedding photo over the bed. He calls Amaya and she states he wasn't home last night. She wants him to pack his things. The wardrobe is already wide open. Rebecca hurries back to the window to watch Olmo go. Amaya's parents watch Olmo leave their lives. The mother's bet was that the relationship wouldn't last. Olmo thanks his in-laws for everything before he drives off. Olmo seeks refuge at Victor's house. Victor invited him over, and Rebecca gives up her room, but she'll need to share the wardrobe space with Olmo. Olmo becomes a home buddy, always at home with the women. Victor starts returning home late, while on the other hand, Amaya seems to have found her match in Nuria. Mark asserts Amaya had an ulterior motive. She'd taken an interest in the whole Russian mafias in Spain. She believed Olmo wasn't just a bodyguard and a driver for Nuria's family. He was a spy. She elucidated that Olmo was a soldier for a major Russian mafia gang. Jacinto was the boss, and he sent his sons to survey Costa Brava. Georgians wanted Lore de Mar, Nuria's parents, to be collateral damage in a tough war. They wanted to harm Olmo and extort money from Nuria. Nuria let on that they succeeded. Her house became the HQ of the Georgian mafia. Olmo's gang had lost, but Olmo still took out Dimitri to exude honor. Amaya didn't know Olmo was part of an organizational crime group, but she knew he was too mysterious, too closed up, and she wouldn't rest till she figured him out. It's finally time for Nuria's wedding. Olmo and Rebecca will be attending. Rebecca teases Olmo over his suit because it's the same suit from his own wedding to Amaya. In the car, she tries to engage him in conversation. Then she reveals she's been interested in him since she was 14. He replies the age difference is much, and they're already family. Older Rebecca tells Mark that she didn't mean it, but Mark believes she desired Olmo. During the wedding, Rebecca still tries to express affection towards Olmo, but he's irritated still. There's no bad blood between Olmo and Amaya. She lets him know she's aware of his mafia ties and is writing a book about it. He couldn't talk about it because he's sworn to secrecy. Mark makes his presence known to Rebecca. Older Rebecca remembers he'd kissed her twice on the cheek. She also remembers he'd looked at her with admiration, but she wasn't drawn to him at the moment. He strikes up a conversation with her and Rebecca loosens up more, asking to dance with him. She spots Olmo and kisses Mark to spite him. Olmo is too busy watching the newlyweds instead. Rebecca and Mark go to film school in Alicante. They become a couple and Rebecca insists that she returns home every weekend. Older Mark opines that Maka's health was a disguise and Rebecca went home for other reasons. Rebecca tries to dissuade, but Mark stands that they have to be honest and bare. It was Rebecca's idea in the first place. Rebecca isn't ready to face the truth. She's too attached to Victor to envision him as part of some mafia fiasco. Mark insists, relaying more stuff that Amaya gathered. The brothers were loyal to their father, the mafia boss. He doesn't believe it's a coincidence both brothers left home at the exact same time. They were primarily on a mission. Mark pushes Rebecca to recall her mother's termination attempt. Maka leaves the bathroom door open. Victor is still a late-nighter. Rebecca screams for Olmo's help and he rushes in to scoop Maka out of the bloodbath. Maka is admitted to the hospital, and the nurse in attendance ushers Olmo and Rebecca out to change their bloodied clothes. Rebecca decides to join Olmo in the male restroom, where he's methodically washing off. She strips off clothes from her upper half and asks if Olmo has more tattoos, other than the one across his chest. He has one at his back that tags him as an eternal wanderer. With her torso bare, he sees she has no scars, so she directs his palm towards her heart, citing it has scars after being operated on. Ultimately, he jerks away, not wanting to take things further. Victor arrives at the hospital, and Maka's parents are furious with how much he's changed for the worse. Pio accuses him of being a substance addict, but Victor retaliates, pointing out Pio is no saint either. Rebecca steps up to calm her riled father. Victor storms into the ward while Rebecca storms out of the hospital with Olmo. In the car ride home, Rebecca still shoots her shot. Olmo remains a tough nut to crack, but Rebecca teases they have the whole night to themselves with no interruptions. Older Mark is getting angry. He doesn't want the story to stop as Rebecca has to tell him what happened that night. Rebecca hesitates. Mark remembers she was distant, but Rebecca excuses that she clearly had a lot on her plate. Her grandparents took her mom to live with them, and her father had to change jobs, which made him go away on weekends. She types away while the actual memory plays out. Mark makes breakfast and voices his plans to go on a vacation to the Pyrenees with her. He's off showering when Rebecca calls Olmo, and Olmo mentions he'll be moving to Pyrenees. He plans to see an old acquaintance, but Rebecca's 2 cents is that he's going to be paired up with a lady. Rebecca is still trying to push for something between them, and Olmo is bent on reminding her there's a huge age gap. She has to drop the call because Mark is done showering. When he steps out, she lies that it was her mother on the phone. Maka desperately needs her and she has to go. Mark is upset then, and upset now. More now, because he knows the truth. He storms out amidst her apologies and goes under the tree to fume. She goes out to appease him, but he wants to end what they have. In tears, she tells him she's telling the truth now, but it doesn't have to change their present. She's been with him for 2 years now, after his operation. They allude that there's something sinister and haunting about their unfinished story. Rebecca wants to finish it together, but Mark has had enough. He packs his things, and Rebecca still pleads, but Mark is hurt that Rebecca went to lengths to betray him. She watches him in defeat as he loads the truck with his things and drives off without hesitation. Mark goes back to Amaya and adopts her sister. Amaya had been the one to encourage him to write to Rebecca to clear any shadows in their relationship. She knew it was going to hurt, but encouraged them to finish the story even while apart. Meanwhile, Rebecca's parents try to cheer her up. They propose the family could go to Denaya, Victor's parents' place, to blow off steam, but Rebecca isn't in the mood. She knows she's broken something between her and Mark. Mark isn't going to reconsider as her mother suggests. The family go to the villa in Denaya. Rebecca finds a picture of Olmo and has to place it downwards. Her father is out on the pouch, smoking his own father's cigars. Rebecca feels compelled to question what type of businessman Jacinto really was. Her take is that he was shady, but Victor doesn't give in to her curiosity. She mentions she doesn't like the house, so he encourages her to look out to the sea instead. The family go to the beach. 2 families, actually, Mark and Rebecca's. Mark and Rebecca go swimming. They're miles apart, on different beaches, but still connected in their activities. Maka has composed something after 25 years. She owes it to her connection with Giulietta. They'd shared something during Olmo's wedding, and Maka can't tell Rebecca the haunting truth surrounding her birth, but she can sing it to her. So she plays out the lyrics for Rebecca on Giulietta's piano. Rebecca writes an email to Mark about a message Giulietta gave Maka. She's asked her dad to clarify, but he's denied such tales are true. Mark goes on to question Amaya on what she knows about Rebecca's operation. Turns out Maka's parents played dirty. They kidnapped several from the slums trying to get a match for organ transplant. A boy from the slums matched, and that's how he was emptied for Rebecca's sake. It's the same boy that's haunted Maka all these years. Mark wants to know who exactly carried out the dirty work, putting an end to the child's so his organs can be used. Amaya doesn't want to divulge, stating things have gotten too complicated. She started a book she couldn't finish. Mark emails Rebecca, ready to finish off the story. He tells her she has to pick up from where she stopped. Rebecca goes to see Olmo at her father's house after lying to Mark. She meets a confrontation between the two brothers, and initially hides in Olmo's car so she's not discovered. Victor's addiction problem has gotten worse and Olmo is leaving. Olmo and Victor do discover Rebecca in the car, and Victor can't believe his brother would betray him like this. Victor pulls his daughter out of the car aggressively, then Olmo and Victor get into a fight. In the end, Rebecca is still bent on leaving with Olmo because her father is not the only one with an addiction. Mark and his family go to the Pyrenees. Amaya and Nuria are in the process of adopting a child that will become part of their family by summer. Around that same time, Maka's parents drive her to go see Rebecca's uncle the priest. Maka gets a call from Victor, who's managing a chest pain after his row with Olmo. Olmo and Rebecca talk about going to Monte Perdido together. He's canceled his previous plans with Veronica. Mark calls Rebecca to give him an update on where he is. She realizes they're passing the same road. At some point, Maka is no longer with her parents in the car. They're also on the same route as Mark and Rebecca. The car brake fails and Nuria swerves the car off the road and into a field of bulls. The car somersaults multiple times, and Rebecca's still connected to her call with Mark at the time of the accident. Meanwhile, the frightened bulls run into the road and collide with Pio and Candela. Rebecca and Olmo arrive after the accident has already taken place. Looking back now, Mark doesn't remember Rebecca rushing through the fields to their car. Olmo is the one to ascertain Amaya is still alive. Nuria previously thought she'd lost her because she was unresponsive. Rebecca rushes to tell Nuria the good news, and what she gets in return is the revelation that Olmo is Mark's father. Mark is in the theater about to undergo surgery. Olmo comes with news that Nuria passed on in the ambulance, but Amaya will be fine. Rebecca falls into his embrace and asks if he knew he was Mark's father. He didn't. A doctor steps out to tell them Mark needs multiple organ transplants, so Olmo takes up the challenge to find someone. He'd done it before to save Rebecca, and let her know he loved her. Next thing Rebecca knows, Olmo goes into the restroom, leaves the door open, then runs like a bull, head-butting a wall and taking his own. When Jacinto receives the news, he runs a bullet through Julietta's head and then his. Rebecca sees the ghost of Julieta on the piano, stating that when it comes to them, they can believe the worst. Mark asks Amaya which one of the brothers hurt the little boy, but Amaya can't tell, nor does she indulge Mark's conclusion to his hearing. It was their final mission for their father. Rebecca emails Mark that there's nothing more to add to the story. Mark checks out the Denaya villa with Amaya and tells her he's going there. Rebecca's parents join her at the beach. Her mother is in the water, giving her room to question her dad. The tattoo on his arm was once an eagle he covered up with a tattoo of Maka. He wasn't a fan of her music when they met, but grew to become a fan. He'd been the one to hurt the boy from the slums, and Rebecca's grandfather paid enough money so he wouldn't know exactly who carried out the orders. That's why Victor easily passed living with them as a chance. He was remorseful after the order, and his love for both Maka and Rebecca came naturally. Maka and Rebecca kiss him to show he's forgiven, and they're grateful. Mark finds Rebecca at the beach and joins her in the water. The two submerge into the water to embrace and re-emerge in each other's arms.